My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. On the evening of September 23rd, I was sitting alone in my small design studio on South Boulevard in Charlotte, North Carolina, finishing a mood board for a client in Ballantyne. The hour was 20 past 8. Clara had been asleep since 7. Derek was home. That was our arrangement. On my late studio nights, he stayed in with her. On his late office nights, which had grown more frequent since the spring, which I had noted and filed and said nothing about, I stayed home. We had a system. I believed for 6 years that we had a marriage. My phone buzzed against the surface of the desk. A motion alert from the Nest camera installed in Clara's nursery. The smart baby monitor. We had set it up when she was born, 16 months earlier, because I was the kind of new mother who wanted to hear her child breathe through the night. And Derek had suggested the camera as a gentler alternative to me physically checking on her every 40 minutes. It synced to both of our phones. It recorded automatically whenever it detected sound or movement within the room. It stored those recordings in the cloud for 30 days before overwriting them. That last detail mattered far more than either of us had ever anticipated when we ordered it from the baby registry. I opened the app. The nursery was dark except for the soft glow of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, the one we had brought home from a boutique on King Street in Charleston during a weekend trip the previous spring. Clara was asleep in her crib, one small fist curled close to her cheek, still, perfect. The image of her was calm in a way that the audio immediately was not. The microphone on that monitor was more sensitive than most people give those devices credit for. It was designed to catch the smallest possible sounds, a shift in breathing, a cough beginning before it had fully formed, a cry in its earliest stage. That night, it caught something it was never designed to find. Through the audio feed, I could hear the living room, the low murmur of the television, then a woman's laugh, deliberate, low, and unhurried, the kind of laugh a woman produces when she wants a man to understand that she finds him charming. And then I heard my husband's voice, clear, unmistakable, relaxed in the particular way that only comes when a person believes they are entirely unobserved. "She's clueless," he said, "completely clueless. She has no idea. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. And I listened. What they didn't know was that I had already been building something in the margins of my own life for 7 months. Something quiet and careful and entirely beyond their line of sight. What they didn't know was that the law was already positioned in my favor before I had reason to formally use it. What they didn't know was that by the time the 3rd Saturday of November came around, my husband would be served divorce papers at his own dinner table, in front of every person whose opinion he had used for years to make me smaller than I was. This is that story. Derek Callahan and I met on a Saturday evening in March, 6 years ago, at a dinner party hosted by our mutual friends Mark and Sandra Kingston and their brownstone on Villa Heights Drive in Plaza Midwood, Charlotte. He was 31 years old. I was 28. He was wearing a slate gray linen blazer and managing 3 separate conversations at once, with the easy competence of a man who has never once questioned whether he belongs in any room he enters. I was standing near the bookshelves on the far wall, holding a glass of Pinot Noir, quietly trying to remember the names of the couple I had just been introduced to 6 minutes earlier. He crossed the room to speak to me, not with a performance, just deliberately, unhurried, as though he had made a decision and was carrying it out. He had noticed me looking at the book spines. He asked what I was reading at home. We talked for 3 hours that evening. He was a financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Partners, a mid-sized wealth management firm in uptown Charlotte, where he had built his client roster carefully over 4 years, specializing in business owners and physicians across the greater Charlotte area. He earned well. He carried himself like someone who knew he did. And he had a way of asking questions that made you feel, in the moment, like the most interesting person in the room. That is a specific and powerful skill, and I want to name it as a skill rather than a quality, because the difference matters. We married 2 years later, in May, at the Ritz-Carlton in uptown Charlotte. With 87 guests and an ivory silk gown I had designed myself on paper and had made by a seamstress I found through a referral in Asheville. Derek wept at the altar. Genuinely. I want you to hold that detail. Not as evidence that he was once a good man, or that the marriage was not real, but as illustration of how thoroughly love can be performed by someone who has not yet been confronted with what it costs to sustain. We purchased the house on Lexington Avenue in Dilworth 6 months after the wedding. 4 bedrooms, a deep front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a kitchen with gray marble countertops and brass hardware, and a backyard with a magnolia tree old enough to have seen several families live in that house. The purchase price was $540,000. Both of our names were on the mortgage. I want you to hold that detail too. It mattered later in a way. I want to be precise about. Derek's professional life was orderly and growing. Mine had been too before we married. I had been a freelance interior designer for 4 years after university, working from a small studio I rented month to month on South Boulevard, building a client base that included 2 restaurants, a boutique hotel in Uptown, and a consistent roster of residential projects. I was not a hobbyist. I had a practice, with invoices and vendors, and a reputation that was starting to compound the way a good reputation does, quietly and through referral. That matters as context for everything that came after. When Clara was born 16 months ago, I stepped away from my design clients. Derek never said outright that I should stop working. He operated through a more refined approach. He would express concern about my stress levels in front of others, framing it as protectiveness. He would note in the measured voice he reserved for financial projections that the overhead of maintaining the studio doesn't pencil out right now with the nursing schedule. He would ask, on evenings when I came home late from a client walkthrough, whether the pace was really sustainable for someone in my position. Each question was deniable in isolation. Accumulated over weeks and months, they formed a pattern with a very specific shape, the gradual, deliberate erasure of an inconvenient version of me. What he said in public was dressed in warmth but equally deliberate. At his firm's holiday party in December, he told a colleague named Robert with his arm around my shoulder, "Nora's stepping back from design while Clara settles in. She's being very sensible about it." At his mother, Patricia's Easter brunch, the following April, when someone at the table asked if I was still doing interiors, Derek answered for me before I could open my mouth. On hold for now. Family first. He said it with genuine-sounding warmth. He said it while I was sitting right there, at our neighborhood block party in July, when the woman 3 doors down asked if I was taking new clients. Derek pulled me into his side and said, "Ask us again in a year or 2. He said us, as though the answer to a question about my career was a shared decision. Patricia, his mother, was a woman who wore pearl earrings to casual lunches and lived in a brick colonial in Cornelius, with freshly painted shutters and a very particular idea of what a properly managed life looked like, and of who was and wasn't capable of managing one. She had never, in 6 years of our acquaintance, asked me a question about my work that contained genuine curiosity. At a birthday dinner for Derek's sister the spring before last, she had said to me across the dessert plates, "It must be so lovely not to have to worry about commuting." She had meant it as a compliment. I passed the bread basket and smiled and made a note somewhere in the back of my mind. The financial architecture of our marriage was Derek's design from the beginning. I had found it logical when we were first married. His income from Meridian was direct deposited to the joint account. The mortgage, utilities, insurance, and household bills were automated from that same account. There was a second account, the investment portfolio where the actual accumulation happened, that Derek managed completely alone. He produced monthly summary sheets on Meridian letterhead, which he left on the kitchen counter on the last Friday of each month. The summaries were thorough and professional and entirely on his terms. They told me what he decided I should know about the money we had together, nothing more. My household allocation. He did not call it an allowance in front of others, but that was its function. Was $2,400, deposited on the 1st of every month. It covered groceries, gas, Clara's supplies, anything personal. In the early years, it had felt more than adequate. By the time Clara was born, It felt like the monthly budget issued to a dependent, like a stipend, like permission. I want to tell you about a dinner party in August at the home of Derek's business partner, Glenn Harwood, and his wife Cecilia, in their house in Myers Park, 12 people around a long dining table. I had brought a bottle of 2019 Barolo and a rosemary olive bread I had baked that afternoon. At some point in the evening, the conversation turned to new ventures and reinvention. Cecilia had just launched an event planning company, and the table was engaged with her, genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions, the way people do when they sense someone has done something real. Someone at the table turned to me. "Nora, didn't you do interior design before? Are you thinking about getting back into it?" Before I could answer, Derek said, "She's still figuring out what she wants." He reached over and placed his hand on mine warmly, in full view of the table. "There's no rush." The conversation continued around me. I looked at my wine glass for a moment, perhaps 2 seconds, perhaps 3, and then I rejoined it. But I registered what had happened with the precision of someone who has learned to keep careful records of small things. The door closed so smoothly, the key turned so quietly that no one else heard the lock engage. The question that was mine answered before it could be. That is the architecture of how a woman like me gets built, over years and without ceremony, into the version her husband needs her to be. It is not one large act of cruelty. It is 1,000 small, precisely calibrated ones, each deniable, each warm-sounding, together forming a structure that is almost impossible to name from the inside while you are still living within it. He had built a version of me, pleasant, domestic, dependent, somewhat confused by the world he navigated so confidently, and had come to believe in her so thoroughly that he offered her to another woman as a guarantee of his safety. That was the first mistake. The first of several. There was a Christmas morning, 3 years into our marriage, when Derek gave me a piece of jewelry I had not asked for and would not have chosen, a gold bracelet, delicate, beautiful in a generic way, the kind of thing that signals care without requiring knowledge of the recipient. I thanked him warmly and wore it that afternoon to his mother's house, and said it was lovely whenever anyone commented. What I wanted had been a specific drafting software license for a project I was designing. I had mentioned it twice. He had heard something else, or had heard me clearly and decided on the bracelet anyway, because the bracelet was something he could hand over at the table in front of his family and receive credit for in real time. That is a small example. I offer it not because it was devastating, but because it is precise. It captures something about the mechanism, the way a person's actual desires get replaced over time by a curated version of what their partner is comfortable providing. The bracelet sat in my jewelry box for 3 years. The software I eventually bought for myself 2 years later, in February, from the savings account in my maiden name. There was also the matter of the studio lease. When Clara was born and I stepped away from clients, I had continued paying the monthly lease on my studio space on South Boulevard, $820 a month. I paid it quietly from my allocation for 8 months, telling Derek it had been resolved while I kept the keys. I kept the space. I kept the possibility of return open in a way he did not know about, because I had not told him and he had not asked, because in his settled understanding of our domestic arrangement, the studio was already past tense. It was not past tense, it was waiting. I listened to 47 minutes of audio that Tuesday evening in my studio on South Boulevard. The recording was not uniformly clear. The monitor's microphone had been calibrated to capture infant sounds from within the nursery, and what traveled through the wall and the partially closed hallway door came through filtered, occasional, shaped by the particular acoustics of our house. But enough came through. In this kind of story, enough is a word with very serious weight. The woman's name was Vanessa. He used it twice. Once when she asked him to bring her something from the kitchen. "Get it yourself, Vanessa. You know where everything is," he had said, with the ease of a man who has had this particular conversation many times before in this particular space. And once at the end of a sentence I heard with perfect clarity, "Vanessa, stop worrying. She goes straight from the studio to Clara's room when she gets home." She never comes downstairs before morning. He had mapped my movements. He had studied my nightly schedule with the attention of a man who needed to create space in his domestic life for something he needed to keep invisible, and had done so carefully and over a considerable amount of time. The Meridian Wealth Partners website was open on my laptop within 12 minutes of closing the audio app. Vanessa Cho, Jr., portfolio associate, 29 years old, with a professional headshot that appeared to have been taken on a rooftop terrace. Warm light, practiced confidence. Derek had introduced her to me at the company Christmas party in December of the previous year. She had been standing near the bar. "This is Vanessa. She just joined our group." She had shaken my hand. I had told her I liked her gold earrings. She had smiled and said she had gotten them in Savannah. In those 47 minutes of audio, there were 3 things I had not known before and would soon need to be very precise about. First, the affair had been ongoing for 8 months. Second, Derek had told Vanessa, in words I heard clearly, that I had no independent income, that everything of real value was in his name alone, and that I had nowhere to go if things ever went sideways. He had said it not with regret, but with the calm of a man stating a mathematical fact. Third, Vanessa had laughed and said, "So you're completely safe." He had given her my helplessness as a form of reassurance. He had constructed a detailed account of my dependency and used it as currency in another relationship. He had built a narrative of my limitations and offered it as structural support for what he was doing. He had not simply underestimated me. He had made my underestimation load-bearing. I drove home at 10 minutes past 9. I came in through the garage door. The kitchen smelled of the garlic pasta from the meal kit I had left instructions about, which Derek had cooked, which sat warm on the stove under a lid. Clara's ocean wave sound machine was audible from the upstairs hallway. Derek was on the sofa with his feet on the coffee table, watching something on television. He looked up when he heard me come in. "Hey," he said. "How did the Ballantine meeting go?" "Really well," I said. "She loves the color direction." "Good." He turned back to the screen. I went upstairs. I checked on Clara. I stood at the crib railing for a long time, watching the rise and fall of her chest in the blue-gray dark. The monitor blinked its small, steady green light from the dresser. Faithful, thorough, entirely indifferent to what it had gathered. I did not cry that night. I did not lie awake composing confrontations in my head. I did not go back downstairs and say any of the things that were available to me to say. I opened the nightstand drawer and took out the small leather notebook Derek had given me 2 Christmases ago with a card that read, "For your design ideas," and I wrote in it for 43 minutes. Names, dates, what I had heard, what I suspected, what I needed to verify, what I needed to do first, and in what order. When I had finished writing, the shape of the next several weeks was visible. I closed the notebook. I put it in my tote bag. I turned off the lamp and lay down beside my husband in the dark. I said nothing. He was already asleep. That was the moment I stopped being the woman he had decided I was and started becoming the woman he had never once thought to plan for. Derek left for work on Wednesday morning at 7:53. I knew the time because I had been awake for 2 hours by then and had been watching the minutes. I waited until I heard his car reach the end of the block. Then I called Lauren. Lauren Myers had been my closest friend since our first year at Belmont University, when we had lived in adjacent rooms in the same residence hall and stayed up past midnight talking about everything and nothing. She had gone to law school at the University of South Carolina and built a family law practice in Charleston. She had been my maid of honor. She had sat in the hospital waiting area for 6.5 hours with my mother the night Clara was born. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. I kept my voice level and my account sequential. I spoke for 11 minutes without pausing. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Before you do anything else, do not delete the recordings. Do not confront him. Do not move anything in the house, change any accounts, or give any indication that anything is different from yesterday. Do you understand me?" "Yes," I said. "I am texting you a name right now. Annette Keller. She is the best family law attorney in Charlotte. And I know that because I have sent 3 clients to her in the past 4 years, and all 3 of them left their situations with precisely what they were entitled to. Call her this morning. By 9:43 that same Wednesday, I had a confirmed appointment with Annette Keller at Keller & Associates on Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte for the following Monday at 10 in the morning. I went about the rest of that Wednesday as though it were unremarkable. I took Clara to her music and movement class at Harmony Sprouts on Providence Road at 10:30. I ran into our neighbor Beth outside the Harris Teeter on Selwyn Avenue and talked with her for 11 minutes about the new park going in along the Greenway. I came home and made chicken piccata for dinner. Capers, white wine, butter, fresh lemon, fresh parsley, and set the table with the cloth napkins and lit the candle on the kitchen counter. Derek ate 2 full servings and said it was excellent. "Thank you," I said. "The recipe was from the cookbook your mother sent last Christmas." He smiled and went back to his plate. That was the texture of every day for the following 7 weeks, unremarkable from the outside, methodical from the inside. My first meeting with Annette Keller was on the Monday of the first week of October, at 10 in the morning, on the 14th floor of a glass building overlooking Trade Street. She had the particular stillness of someone whose attention is completely functional, not cold, but without wasted motion in it. She was 52 years old, silver-streaked hair pinned carefully at the back of her neck, reading glasses on a thin gold chain at her collarbone. She listened to me speak for 23 minutes without a single interruption. When I finished, she said, "Tell me about the accounts." I told her about the joint checking account, the investment portfolio Derek managed alone, the monthly summary sheets on Meridian letterhead, the $2,400 monthly allocation, and my complete lack of access to the investment account's history or login credentials. She made careful notes in a legal pad. When I had finished, she set down her pen and said, "I need you to gather whatever financial documentation you can access without raising any concern in the household. Transaction records from the joint account going back as far as the online portal allows. Tax returns if they are filed jointly. Mortgage statements. Do this quietly. Not from the home printer. Not from a home network. Bring me what you find." She also told me to preserve every cloud-stored recording the monitor had captured. She would advise me on their specific admissibility in Mecklenburg County. I went home that afternoon and began. Over the following 10 days, I accessed the joint account's online portal using the login Derek had given me 2 years ago and never updated. I downloaded 22 months of transaction records and did not print a single page at home. I drove to the copy center on Central Avenue, paid cash for 109 printed pages, and returned with them in a plain manila folder that I kept in the bottom of my tote bag. I sat in a corner booth at a coffee shop on Park Road for 2 hours and 40 minutes with a yellow highlighter and worked through every page in chronological order. What I found began in February. On the second business day of every month, a transfer had been made from the joint account to an external account I had no login for. The amount was perfectly consistent, $3,200 each time. 8 consecutive months. Total, $25,600. Removed from the marital estate in a pattern precise enough to constitute intention and spaced out enough to escape a casual review. I photographed every highlighted page with my phone. I brought the photographs to Annette at our second meeting on the 14th of October. She looked at the pattern with the expression of someone who has seen this particular arithmetic before, not surprised, not sympathetic in a way that was sentimental, but focused. She assigned a financial investigator to trace the destination account. While the investigator worked, I was occupied in the margins of my own hours with something I had been doing for considerably longer than the investigation had been running. 7 months before the night of the recording, I had quietly resumed taking on design projects. It began with a friend who needed help redesigning her home office and offered to pay me a fair rate. I took the work. I completed it. She referred me to a colleague. That colleague referred me to 2 more people. By September, I had 4 active clients and a portfolio of recently completed work that I was genuinely proud of. I had been depositing every payment, checks, and occasional cash, into a personal savings account I had opened in February at a branch of a bank with no connection to any account Derek knew existed. The account was in my maiden name, Nora Hendricks, with a mailing address at Lauren's firm in Charleston. Over 7 months, I had accumulated $11,800. Not a fortune, but mine. Entirely, invisibly, completely mine. On the 28th of October, I went to the clerk's office in downtown Charlotte and filed the paperwork to register Callahan Design Studio as a limited liability company in the state of North Carolina. The filing fee was $125, which I paid in cash. The following Tuesday, I opened a business checking account at First Bank on Monroe Road. I ordered business cards from a print shop on Commonwealth Avenue. Ivory stock, charcoal ink, clean and minimal. Paying cash. I put 12 in the inner pocket of my tote bag and left the rest in the drawer of my studio desk on South Boulevard. On the 28th of October, while I was standing in the clerk's office waiting for my number to be called, Derek sent me a text asking whether we had more pasta in the pantry. I checked the pantry photograph I kept on my phone for grocery reference. I texted back that we did. I put the phone in my pocket and waited for my number. In the third week of October, Derek and I attended a birthday dinner for his colleague Robert at a restaurant on East Boulevard. 12 people around a long table, good wine, the particular comfort of a group that is socialized together for several years. At some point in the evening, Robert's wife asked me what I was working on. Before I could answer, Derek said, "She's been thinking about getting back into design, taking it slow." He said it pleasantly. He said it as though this were a conversation we had had privately, and he was simply reporting its conclusion to an interested audience. I smiled. I told Robert's wife I was exploring some options. I raised my wine glass. I thought of the LLC I had filed 5 days before, of the LLC paperwork sitting in the drawer at my studio desk, of the business cards already ordered and already in my tote bag, and I said nothing further about any of it. I let the conversation move on. That was the 23rd of October. I had been married to this man for 5 years. I had been watching this particular pattern for most of them. And on that evening, for the first time, I was not simply enduring it. I was counting down. On the 9th of November, I sat across from Annette for the 4th time. The financial investigator's report was in a folder on the desk between us. The $3,200 per month had been deposited into a personal checking account in the name of Vanessa Cho. Under North Carolina law, marital misconduct is a relevant factor in the equitable distribution of marital assets. The documented transfer of $25,600 from a joint marital account to the personal account of a person with whom a spouse has conducted an extramarital relationship constitutes, in Annette's exact language, compelling and well-documented evidence of intentional dissipation of marital assets in furtherance of an adulterous relationship. Combined with audio recordings of the relevant conversations, properly authenticated and produced through discovery, we had what she called setting her pen down, a very complete picture. She told me we were ready to file. I had chosen the date already, the 3rd Saturday of November. Not out of impatience. I had waited 7 weeks without any visible sign of impatience, and I was capable of waiting longer. I chose the date because I understood something about Derek that the law, for all its precision, does not account for. He was most fully himself in public. He was most comfortable, most committed to the version of our life he had curated in front of other people. And the evening where that version of our life was on its most complete and careful display was our annual Friendsgiving dinner. 16 people. The extended table with the leaf Derek's father had made, the silver candlestick holders from his grandmother, the linen tablecloth that had been in the family for 30 years, his mother Patricia, Glenn and Cecilia Harwood, the Kingstons, the neighbors, the colleague from Derek's firm who had been coming for 3 years running. It was the night where the life he had built and controlled was most publicly visible. I believed it was the right place for that version of the life to end. On the Thursday afternoon before the dinner, Annette's paralegal brought a sealed manila jacket to my studio on South Boulevard at 3:15 in the afternoon. Inside, the petition for absolute divorce, Filed with the Mecklenburg County Superior Court clerk that same morning. Signed. Dated. Official. There was also a brief note from Annette on her firm's card. You already know what to do. I read it once. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope in the inner pocket of the blazer hanging on the hook behind my studio door. I drove home and made dinner. If you are still watching right now, I want to stop for just a moment and speak to you directly, because I know that some of you sitting with this story tonight are not simply watching a story. You are sitting with something of your own, a dinner table where someone answered for you before you could speak, an account you were never given full access to, a laugh you heard from the other side of a wall that landed somewhere specific in your chest. If that is you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you are in your own story. And if you have not subscribed to Revenge Chronicles yet, do it right now, because the second half of what I am about to tell you is the part that people come back to watch a second time. I spent the 2 days before the Friendsgiving dinner preparing exactly as I did every year, because any visible deviation from the established ritual of my role in this household would have been noticed by a man who had studied my routines as carefully as I had studied his. I brined the turkey for 26 hours in apple cider, sea salt, bay leaves, and cracked black pepper. I baked 3 pies, pecan, sweet potato, and a deep dish pumpkin with a gilded crust edge I had learned from my grandmother. I polished the silver candlestick holders. I ironed the linen tablecloth. On the morning of the dinner, I arranged dried orange slices and fresh rosemary along the center of the table, between the candlesticks, the way I had done every November since we moved into the house. Derek came into the kitchen on Friday evening and watched me filling a pie shell and said I was really outdoing myself this year. I want it to be a good night, I said. I kept my voice pleasant. I did not look up from the pastry. Our guests arrived beginning at 6 o'clock on Saturday evening. Patricia came first, as she always did. A bottle of Bordeaux, her pearl earrings, her practiced visual survey of the interior of our home completed before she had fully removed her coat. Glenn and Cecilia Harwood arrived at 28 minutes past 6. Mark and Sandra Kingston arrived at 6:45. By 7:15, 16 people were seated around the extended table, and the room was warm with candlelight and the sound of people who were comfortable with each other. I had arranged the seating deliberately, Derek at the head as he always was, I to his left, Glenn to his right, Patricia beside me, the Kingstons directly across. A precise arrangement for a precise evening. The dinner moved through its familiar rhythms. The turkey was carved. Wine was poured and poured again. Side dishes made the full circuit. The room had the particular quality of noise it always had on these evenings. Overlapping conversations, bursts of genuine laughter, the small warmth of shared reference. It was in the slow, generous interval between the main course and dessert, while the table was still animated and the candles had burned down an inch, that Glenn Harwood turned to me with something simply genuine in his expression. "Nora," he said, "I was at the Whitfields in Eastover last weekend for their dinner, and I could not stop looking at what you did with that library room, that wallpaper." Several people at the table turned toward me. "I sourced it from a studio in Lyon," I said. It took almost 3 months to arrive from order to delivery, but I knew from the sample swatch the moment I saw it that it was the only material that would work with that ceiling height and the existing millwork. "It is extraordinary," Glenn said. He was not performing admiration. Glenn had a genuine eye, which was part of why his own home was consistently beautiful. "You have a real practice coming together, don't you?" "Callahan Design Studio," I said. "I filed the LLC in October. 8 active clients as of this month." I felt the shift beside me before I heard it. Derek setting his fork down very precisely at a moment that did not require precision. "8?" said Cecilia. "Nora, I had no idea you'd gotten so established." "I've been building it quietly," I said. Derek said in the particular smooth warmth he had perfected over the years of these dinners. "She does some beautiful work when she has the time. It's a wonderful creative outlet while Clara is still so young." He said it to the table, not to me, adjusting a narrative he had maintained so consistently for so long that he no longer registered he was doing it. A silence settled over the table, brief, but present enough that several people noticed it. Glenn said, mildly and without particular emphasis, "It sounds like considerably more than an outlet, Derek." "The Whitfield Library was a $68,000 commission," I said. I said it the way you read a figure from a printed report. No additional volume, no edge. Simply accurate. Derek turned to look at me directly. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer and placed the envelope on the table beside his wine glass without ceremony or announcement. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when 16 people simultaneously register that something outside the expected shape of the evening has occurred, even before anyone has understood what it is. Derek looked at the envelope. He picked it up. He opened it with the easy confidence of a man who cannot yet imagine that its contents require urgency. He unfolded the papers inside. I watched his face move through the language on the first page in stages. Petition. His name. My name. Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The date. The firm name. Trade Street. He looked up at me. "Nora," he said. "The financial investigator has documented 8 transfers," I said. My voice was entirely level. I kept my eyes on Derek and did not look around the table. $3,200 each, beginning in February, transferred from the joint account to a personal checking account belonging to Vanessa Cho, who is currently employed as a junior portfolio associate at Meridian Wealth Partners and who you introduced to me at last December's firm Christmas party. Patricia made a sound. I cannot precisely describe it except to say it was the involuntary sound of a woman whose comprehensive understanding of a situation has just been entirely revised without her consent. Glenn Harwood set his wine glass down on the tablecloth. Quietly. The room. 16 people who had been producing overlapping conversation 45 seconds ago was silent in a way that was not comfortable or brief. The candle flames moved. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. The Nest baby monitor in Clara's nursery records audio to a cloud storage account. I continued. "I have 47 minutes of recording from the evening of September 23rd. Your attorney will receive the complete evidentiary packet through the appropriate discovery process." Derek's mouth opened. It closed again. He looked, for the first time in 6 years, like a man who did not know what to say. He looked like a man who had built an entire infrastructure of assumption and was feeling it give way all at once. Silently, in front of every person whose opinion he had used, over the years, to manage and diminish the woman sitting to his left. I folded my napkin. I placed it beside my plate. "The pecan pie is on the sideboard," I said to the table. "Please help yourselves. There is vanilla ice cream in the freezer." Derek did not sleep in the house that night. I do not know where he went. When the last of our guests left, Mark and Sandra Kingston, who stayed to help me clear the table without saying very much, which was exactly what I needed, I locked the front door, checked on Clara, and went to bed at 11:15 in the evening. I slept 6.5 hours. He was on the front porch at 8:43 the following morning, ringing the doorbell of a house he had lived in for 4 years. He was still wearing the blazer from the night before, which told me he had not been wherever he had gone long enough to change clothes. I watched him from the upstairs window for a moment before going down. Then I went downstairs and opened the door. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Everything goes through Annette Keller," I said. "Her office is on Trade Street. The number is in the petition. Nora, please." "Her office hours are Monday through Friday," I said. "I'd recommend calling before noon." I closed the door. He came back twice more in the weeks that followed. Each time I listened briefly and referred him, without anger and without drama, to Annette. In January, a letter of apology arrived through his attorney, forwarded to Annette's inbox as a PDF. It was formatted on legal letterhead. I read it once, acknowledged it through the appropriate channel, and returned to the mood board I was developing for a new client in South Park. The divorce took 9 months to finalize. I kept the house on Lexington Avenue. My name had always been on the mortgage, That detail from so early in this story, the one I asked you to hold. I held it for a reason, and the reason was this. It was mine as much as his, and the law knew it, even if he had spent 6 years organizing our life as though it were not. The financial settlement was equitable under North Carolina law, which took into account both the documented marital misconduct and the $25,600 in dissipated marital assets. I will not pretend to you that it felt like enough. I don't believe that is the honest thing to say. But it was accurate, and accurate was what I had asked Vanette to achieve. Vanessa Cho resigned from Meridian Wealth Partners in December. I did not arrange this. It was the natural consequence of what happens when the geometry of a concealed life becomes visible to the people surrounding it. Glenn Harwood mentioned it briefly in a text message in January. I read it, set my phone down on the studio desk, and went back to the materials board in front of me. Patricia called me in the second week of December. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known. I believed her. Patricia's failures were never the failures of malice. They were the failures of a woman who had spent her entire life inside a very precise set of assumptions about what kind of woman is worth paying full attention to. Assumptions that had made her functionally blind to me, not because she disliked me, but because her framework had no proper category for what I was. She had not seen me. I told her I accepted her apology. I told her I hoped she would always be a presence in Clara's life. I meant both of those things. The studio on South Boulevard became my full-time place again in January. I had Clara in a part-time program at a small Montessori school 3 mornings a week, which gave me specific, reliable working hours for the first time since she was born. I used those hours. I used them with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for permission and has finally understood that the permission was always theirs to grant. By March, I had 12 active clients and a waitlist for new inquiries. By May, I had hired a part-time project coordinator named Emily, who had found me through a referral from one of the Eastover clients. Emily was 26 and organized and had an eye for materials that I recognized immediately as something cultivable. Callahan Design Studio. I said those words out loud for the first time in a real meeting, to a real potential client, in a conference room, in a building on South Tryon Street in February. I said them the way you say something you have been practicing in private. Not nervously, but deliberately, letting the words land with the weight they had earned. The client hired me. She referred me to 2 other clients before the project was even finished. I tell you this not because I want you to calculate the distance between that first coffee table printout with the yellow highlighter and this room on South Tryon. I tell you this because the distance is the point, not the destination, but the distance, and what you build along the way when no one is watching. I want to speak now to you, not to the story, not to the details, to you, the person who is still here at this point in the video, at this hour, on this particular day of your life. You found this story for a reason. Maybe it is the word clueless that landed somewhere specific inside you. Maybe it is the household allocation, or the way financial decisions were made over you rather than with you, or the way a specific person in your life consistently spoke for you until your own voice in a room started to feel unfamiliar. Maybe you have never told anyone what the house sounds like in certain hours of the night. Maybe there is a notebook in a drawer somewhere, or the idea of one with a list that you wrote once and then closed and told yourself was overreacting. Here is what I want you to hear. The word clueless is deployed by people who are frightened, not of what you have done, of what you are capable of doing. When Derek whispered those words in what he believed was a private room, he was not describing me. He was describing the story he needed to be true in order to feel safe. He needed to believe I could not see, because if I had been watching and had always been watching and had been building while I watched, then there was no version of what he was doing that was safe. He needed my ignorance to be structural. It was not. I was always watching. I was watching from the first dinner party where he answered a question meant for me before I could open my mouth. I was watching from the first monthly deposit. I was watching from every evening where he translated my professional life into a gentle hobby for the benefit of a table full of people. I saw everything, and I chose to act on what I saw, not when I was the most angry. I was never publicly angry, but when I was the most prepared. There is a woman watching this right now who is in that particular place, who sees clearly and is not yet ready to act on it. I am not here to hurry you. Your timeline belongs to you and no one else. What I am here to say is that the building happens before the reveal. The quiet is not empty. The quiet is where the real work gets done. The notebook in the drawer, or the call you have not made yet, or the savings account you've been thinking about, those things are not small. They are the beginning of everything that comes after. Open the notebook. Make the list. Make the call when you are ready. Not because the point is winning. It never is, not really. Not when you have lived close enough to it to feel its full weight. But because the life waiting on the other side of this silence belongs to you. And you are far more capable of building it than anyone around you has taken the time to understand. My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. I built everything I have in silence, and I am only just beginning. What would you have done if you found that recording? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. Before I go, I want to take a moment that is just for you, for the person on the other end of this screen who gave this story their full attention today. If you made it here to the end, I want you to know something. The fact that you stayed says everything about who you are. You believe in the slow turn. You know that the most important chapters in a woman's life are rarely the loudest ones. Thank you for being here. Thank you for every comment, every share, and every subscription that sends these stories to the women who need them. This channel exists because of you, not in spite of anything, but because of every one of you who shows up. We put out a new story every single day on Revenge Chronicles. Follow the channel, and the next one will be waiting for you the moment you need it.